All right. Well, hey, good afternoon, good morning to you, Ollie. Appreciate you joining us a day ahead of time from New Zealand. Very exciting to have you here.
Hey, Bill, thanks so much for jumping on. Yeah, the time zone is different, but it also means I'm wide awake, early in the morning, late for you. So we're ready to go.
Yeah, I got the late afternoon iced tea here to keep me going here, right?
Well, I was going to guess it was a whiskey, so thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, it looks that way. Yeah, this is probably what they use in TV shows for booze, right?
Yep, yep.
Yeah. So, hey, are you watching any of the Women's World Cup down there?
A lot of it's happening. We're in the capital city, Wellington, so there's a lot of games, a lot of activity happening around. I haven't been to a game yet, but we will certainly have one on the horizon. It's getting pretty chilly. We're obviously in the middle of winter now, so we will find one to join.
Yeah, no, I think the USA team played in Auckland, I think, the other day. I can't remember. I knew it was in New Zealand. So,
Yep.
Um, women's soccer is growing, so the interest here. I mean, our women's national team is far better than the men's team, so they're looking at a three-peat, trying to win it for the third year in a row. But people are pretty excited down there for it.
Yeah, I think very much that increase in women's sports in general has really been an awareness in New Zealand lately, which has been really cool. We had last year with the women's rugby, it did really, really well, and the whole sevens teams, the full 15, were getting some really good wins, and some of the games were a lot more interesting than males. So I think there was a real transition towards that interest and increase in that popularity of those sports anyway. So I think the same theme and timing of the football couldn't be better. So I think it's coming up.
Yeah, definitely. There's an increase in popularity of in this country, women's soccer, women's basketball. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a long time coming. Rugby is one sport. I mean, I've got a good friend who plays it, but it's one sport that I simply can't figure out. I mean, I watch every single sport there is, but rugby I can't figure out. But believe it or not, right here in Colorado we are actually the rugby capital of the USA. It's
Right.
Yeah, that we have a big stadium in Glendale, which is a little enclave in the middle of Denver that is a rugby specific stadium, which I don't know
Right.
how many of those we even have in the USA,
Yeah.
but yeah, for whatever reason, but I still don't understand the game whatsoever. So I've tried.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it would be super interesting to see America get into it to the degree that other countries like New Zealand would be, because it'd be absolutely unstoppable with the level of the muscle on the front packs with the speed in the back. It would be super interesting, and everyone has their own sports. Australia has their AFL alongside the rugby as well, and they still managed to do it. So yeah, we've seen the American teams come out, but it would be super interesting to see that keep growing.
Yeah, well, like my friends in Australia who say, they watch the AFL and they're like, we don't understand your American football. You guys have to wear pads and helmets. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
with you guys and and you know how football players huddle here. You know,
yep.
my friends in Australia said, we don't understand it. You run a play and then you go back and talk about it for 30 seconds. They don't understand that actually the reason why they're going in the huddle is to plan the next play. But yeah, it's a pretty strange concept to you guys. And of course, rugby and AFL is pretty strange to us as well.
Yeah, we'd be pretty biased, I think, either way. But I think rugby, in a lot of ways, would be summarized by NFL without the huddles and without the pads. So
Right.
it's a lot more dynamic. It's playing on your feet, working out where the next strategy will come in, kind of as you're playing the game, and certainly where the Kiwis and the All Blacks are still leading at the moment is because the game becomes so fast paced that it's very hard to keep up with. Teams are constantly trying to slow the game down. So
Really?
imagine taking those huddles away and just keeping that strategy going, and it not quite going to plan, but finding a way to move around and just keep that moving. Majority of the time it's a little bit more fast paced, so you can see it a lot happening just as they go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm learning something right there. Um, yeah, our American football keeps changing, but we're still trying to figure out the rules. It's amazing how they seem to change the rules every year, and
Yeah.
it serves to confuse us fans. But um,
Yep.
yeah, it's fundamentally the same. But now they're taking away kickoffs. The extra points are longer. It's pretty crazy.
Right.
But
Okay.
anyhow, we didn't start this all to talk about football and rugby anyway, right? But no, I really appreciate. I'm really excited about being able to talk to you here. A lot of our listeners really struggle sometimes with their workout programs, and we get a lot of folks who real life gets in the way. They're training to run everything from 10Ks to marathons to ultra marathons, triathlons, whatever it is. But at the same time, they're having babies, they have jobs, um, and of course I don't know how bad it is in New Zealand. It's probably pretty similar, but the American diet is total garbage half the time. We're getting bombarded by our food industry. Our government subsidizes a lot of industries like pork and eggs and dairy and beef and whatever, a lot of unhealthy dietary practices, basically. And as a result, people are living unhealthier lives. They're not getting ahead in terms of where they would really like their athletic lives, their overall health to be. And of course, we have a huge increase in this country in incidence of diabetes and hypertension and obesity, et cetera. Again, I'm not sure if it's very similar in New Zealand, but I know it's something that you're there addressing, so that must be there in some element as well.
Yeah. One of the things I will say is America is certainly one of them that when we dive into gut health and we dive into general cellular health overall, America is certainly one that's been a little bit more advanced in ways that we don't want them to be, i.e. herbicides being so overused that it's very much circulating in the atmosphere. And you're getting to the point that even if it's organic, you've still got a level of trace herbicides there, which creates its own issues. I think the farming practices over here are a lot more focused towards organic or grass-fed, or very much more, in essence, just more ethical. There's a lot more of a focus around how it's really open green. And I think that allows, that consumption of meat to be a very different conversation, right? Because there's a huge difference between a very processed, caged hen or chicken to come through, which, you can see the differences, like pale and full of antibiotics, compared to something that has been free range and is high quality. So we're a big fan of whole foods and having a big focus on having a good amount of variety and fibers and different nutrients in there as well. For us, we do tend to really, certainly because we lean towards more of the 40, 50, 60-year-old crowd, that awareness towards a higher protein space and a little bit more meat in that diet is something we look at quite a bit. But definitely a lean towards it's still coming from very ethical sources, from natural sources, and I do think that's a little easier to do in New Zealand. When I was in the US last year, it seems to be very easy to go to gluten-free or dairy-free or even lactose-free milks, etc. But I did find it a lot harder to find high-quality meats that weren't incredibly expensive or 10Ks out of the city I was staying in.
Right. No, it's I noticed, even I went to Europe about 15 years ago. I was in Scotland and noticed how the egg yolks were like this bright yellow orange color, whereas in this country, if you get an egg, it is that pale, yucky looking yellow, if you would.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, obviously a difference in what the hens were being fed and what they are seeing in terms of antibiotics, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that transition, which I think is a really positive one overall, is as a society over the last 15 years, or just globally, I think that transition away from one of the big dieting concepts, certainly through the 2000s, were this: if it fits your macros, right? Like, it's just calories in, calories out, doesn't matter what the calorie is made of, this will be how you lose weight or gain weight. And I think slowly people are becoming more aware of that overall, where the quality of foods you're eating, you are what you eat, or even you are what you ate, right? There's an awareness of really bringing back this quality of foods and how much that has an impact of just a cellular level. And I think in itself, that's very positive around looking at this through a more of a long-term lens, because short-term, you might be able to lose, body fat on your pinkies and rice wafers. But when we look at it through the quality of life, the mental health, your energy through that same space, where hopefully expanding our goals overall beyond simply fat loss itself, into how that whole body works as a whole and the implications of that over the next 10 to 20 years. And I think that's a conversation worth having.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I had to stop you with one thing, though. Your New Zealand vernacular there. What are pinkies?
I was actually ironically using your American that was it, Twinkies, not pinkies. That's the one I was looking for.
Okay, there you go.
We don't even have those over here, so I was attempting to use your analogies, but those snacks, those processed foods, those overly packaged and colorful foods that are great for the taste buds initially, not so great for the energy buds.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Yeah. One of our favorite guests on this podcast is from Australia, by the way. And she was cracking up about the fact that we didn't know what lollies were. Um,
Yeah.
it's we call it candy here. So yeah, every now and then she slips in a word that goes over my head. And so pinkies, I was like, okay, that's another one of those probably, but gotcha.
No, it wasn't. That was my slip of a tongue. So
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get a couple of those through the call.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, so we're kind of going in a different area than I anticipated starting, but it's where I wanted to end up basically. But yeah, talking about the gut biome and basically how it has gotten kind of really destroyed by a lot of our agricultural practices in this country. You have a great article on your website about, and your history here about the Dust Bowl we had here in the United States back in the Depression era. And how all the topsoil got blown away, and how farmers have basically learned to supplement what went into the soil. And it reminds me a little bit, just to digress for a second, of how in a lot of breads that they sell, they always have on the label enriched, and they're throwing all the vitamins in because it all got processed out in the first place. It doesn't have the wheat bran and everything that brought the vitamins and fiber to that wheat bread in the first place. So they've got to enrich that bread. And same thing, the topsoil got blown away. And so what they started doing was throwing in fertilizers. And, the farmers noticed, hey, look how green everything looks here. It grows very well, but in fact, it isn't very healthy. And you made a great analogy to what antibiotics have done. And, why don't you talk a little bit more about how, that's all kind of interrelated and how it's led to some of the deficiencies we have in our bodies today.
Yeah, it's a very interesting space where I think that Dust Bowl era and that awareness of very much the advancement of farming practices or supposed advancements of farming practices through the same era as things like probiotics came through was no coincidence, right? It was an awareness of really that first breakthrough of our antibiotics was a massive breakthrough, and obviously a very positive step for medical science in that space of understanding how what it allowed to do is reduce a lot of those diseases through that time, right? And when we're looking at fixing acute problems over a certain time period, they got very, very good at doing that. But if we step back and we look at this over the last 50 to 70 years, we're really in a space where there's an inverse relationship where we've had really, really good progress with acute problems, and what we've caused in that space is chronic ones, right? So by trying to keep things over clean, by sanitizing everything, by trying to kill the weeds and try get the plants to grow by somehow isolating those chemicals, what we've done is allow things to grow quicker, but really it's like the skyscraper without any sort of base, right? Those plants are a lot more fragile. They don't have those roots really deep down into the soils, which means they don't have the nutrients that come along with them. And in turn, what's happening is these herbicides certainly are ones that when we looked at it through the initial lens of, okay, is it harmful to the human body? Well, no, it doesn't have an impact to the human cells itself, right? But what it's made for and what it's designed for is to kill bacteria, right? So there's a certain protein block that's happening that's actually causing over time a real deficiency in the diversity of really the plants and also our own microbiomes and being able to rebuild and defend ourselves against those plants, right? Against the outside world. And the same thing with plants has happened is really plants have become so fragile that they need these herbicides in order to survive. Whereas, go back 100 years, they were able to do that by themselves. They didn't grow as quickly, but they grew stronger. They were more stable overall. And I think what's happened in a space where we're so focused on things happening faster and more profitable, we're finding ways to cut corners and we're finding ways to grow things quicker, right? Kind of where we started today's conversation around the meat industry and how those things are growing. When we look at it through the gut itself, one of the things that we focus on a ton is, very much away from this concept that I think it's a very positive one. We're getting away from calories in, calories out. Certainly, thermodynamics have an impact on our ability to drop body fat, maintain weight, or even gain weight. But we do need to look at a cellular level. Are things healthy? Are we functioning long term? Because there's no point, dropping some body fat and seeing the body actually get unhealthy overall. So for us, we look at a lot of blood work. We make sure that the goal here is. And we can certainly come around to this concept. I'm certainly being fascinated about it over the last 6 to 12 months as a real prime focus of us has been the optimizing for 80, right? And I think what that allows, and certainly as you mentioned before, this motivation towards people in the mid 40s and 50s around how to get their training in still. I think for a lot of men, especially women, just as much so, we've noticed that when they're in their 20s, there was more of a focus on very much physical appearance, getting those abs on the beach, right? That awareness around how training could make me look better. As we move towards our 40s and 50s, I think that can still be a focus. There's always a vanity metric, I think, still at play, but I think there becomes a natural transition towards a long-term goal. How can I still be there for my grandkids? How can I make sure I'm still self-sufficient at 80? How can I make sure I'm still strong, stable, balanced in that space to be able to do the things I want to do, like running or snow skiing, whatever it might be?
Right.
And I think being able to maintain those things as long as possible has really come back to changing our entire outlook on what health truly is. And as long as we tune into that and we bring an awareness to our own personal journey, rather than trying to lose 20 pounds in 3 minutes, right? Like it's an awareness towards the bigger picture.
Right.
And I think that's where that conversation of gut health becomes very invited, because we really start to look at those gut buddies, what we call that microbiome in our stomach, is something that really is along for the ride. And if our gut bacteria is not healthy, is not in the right ratio, our body overall is going to be fighting an unwinnable battle, right? So it really does come, I've touched on a ton of topics here and we can go any way you like, but that awareness of the quality of the foods we eat then impacts the quality of the diversity in our gut, which then leads to the quality of ultimately our body and our ability to adjust. So if we're not responding to exercise, we're not healthy, we're not dropping body fat, it becomes less about the external tangibles like calories and macros, and it becomes more of an internal focus of how do we get this body healthy first. And I think that becomes a 1 or 2 month process of just getting your body back on your side, especially past 30, 35, that needs to be a focus that everybody's skipping, right? They're going onto the keto plan, they're going onto the next low carb plan, whatever it might be, but they're skipping the process of actually just getting healthy first. And I think that's a huge focus of ours. It becomes a huge focus of where this conversation starts, which is high quality food.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's part of kind of personal interest of mine because this past winter, in Northern Hemisphere winter,
Yep.
I was not feeling good on my runs. I would start a run, I'd feel really worn out, be out of breath, and it would take me a while to catch up to the kids I'm coaching there. It just something wasn't right. So I started working with a nutritionist, a company here called Excella in Massachusetts, and they did a blood test. And long story short, but the conclusion came down to working really on my gut biome, and I started eating a lot more omega-3 related foods and fermented foods. And even with my lunch today, I was eating some kimchi as alongside my avocado toast, and
Yep.
just eating just a lot of healthier stuff. And not only did it really almost instantly start improving the way I felt in my runs, but all of a sudden my energy has been off the charts. I mean, I'm just like buzzing around like a hummingbird on heroin, basically. And it's so really a really nice byproduct, if you would, that I've got energy to do a lot more things. And it all kind of came down to working on the gut biome, which, just it was a positive change overall.
Yep. Yeah. That transition over time from your 20s to your 40s to your 60s becomes, I think, a big part of that is your transition towards your requirements for higher protein and fats, right? As we're 20s, we can probably run on carbohydrates. We can eat most of those foods. Certainly, if you were still a runner back then, you would have been able to eat a lot of things, right? Whereas as we tend to get older, on the male side, it's quite interesting. It's more simple, but it's more drawn out. From anywhere from 30 to 35, we start to see this decline in testosterone. Whereas on the female side, we really go through that transition in more of a 9-year period known as menopause, right? So both genders go through it, but it's very much from an awareness of we do need to, over time, move towards more of a protein and fats dominant nutrition plan. Otherwise, as you said, you get that fatigue, you don't have that drive, that level of push that you used to have. And I think a big part of that comes back down to, as we get older, we tend to notice that we don't, I'll use meats as an example, but you can use those sort of heavier foods as any example, where we see people transitioning towards sort of lighter meals as we get older. But in turn, what happens is that's really usually a reduction in stomach acid, right? It's a reduction in our body's ability to digest and break foods down. So as you mentioned with those sort of acidic foods and that ability to look at kimchis, lemon waters, apple cider vinegars, right? Like, really assist with digestion and breaking foods down. So rather than, moving away from those heavier meals, those higher protein options, as you're doing, that ability to come back to, okay, let's actually look at assisting my digestion so I can keep eating the foods required to do the running, to do the strength building activities, which are more and more required the older we get.
So is that what's really happening then? As I've added all these other foods, I'm now being more efficient in how I'm processing the food. Is that the thinking here?
It can be part of it, yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I think a big part of kimchi's, etc., can be an awareness of really balancing out your probiotics, your prebiotics, and having some fermented foods there for your good bacteria to really feed off. So that's deeper down your digestive tract. But I think certainly from a lemon water, apple cider vinegar standpoint, that ability to improve or even increase the acidity in your stomach, which typically starts to decrease over time, is something that certainly is beneficial. You put those two together, you've got a pretty unstoppable gut. One of the things that we see come through a ton is, the rise of our antacids and our acid blockers, right? That people are starting to get heartburn. And a lot of that we start to assume is too much acid in our stomach, right? A lot of the time it's actually the other side. 90% of it plus can be actually too little stomach acid rather than too much, right? So it's the exact opposite of what we think the problem is. And really we're starting to burn our esophagus further by having to patch fix something that wasn't the problem to start with. So working with our body, again, it comes back to fixing a chronic problem, not trying to fix it with an acute solution. And I think that really summarizes what we're working against here, where there's an amazing industry in this medical space for acute diseases and fixing those problems in the short term, but we're not building a skill set as our own personal individual. And I think that's the agency that's at play here, is we need to feel more in tune with what our body requires and how to build up that personal strength, that immune system, the digestion, that recovery capacity to be in a position to digest and really be healthy long term.
Yeah. So, I don't even really know, where does heartburn come from? I've never had it, but I'm amazed at how many younger people. Well, I had an 18-year-old living with me recently who would get heartburn, and I'm like, why in the hell are you getting? I always associate that as another person's disease, but it could be, or disease or symptom. But his diet was trash, so I would assume it had something to do with that. I mean, where would it come from typically?
Yeah. So heartburn in its typical sense is very much just the stomach acid making its way back up into the esophagus, right? That's where the burning sensation is coming from. And essentially, you're supposed to have a muscle at the bottom of your esophagus that's supposed to close and really keep that from going back up there. Because as you know, it's pretty uncomfortable. So when we look at that space, as you very rightly I pointed out, a big part of that can come back to general intolerances or sensitivities in the foods you're eating, right? So if your diet's generally pretty crap, that's going to be one of your largest indicators towards that heartburn coming through against really that digestive state. So I'm going to put two main ones, certainly for my personal observation, is going to be crappy foods that your body's not tolerating particularly well. And two is the digestive state into which you're eating. And this is a fascinating topic and one that's a really easy fix that most people really miss. And I think really it's a space where we live in, where we're go. We're so focused on so many things externally. We're always eating with a screen in front of us, or we're worried about the next meeting coming through, that we're always in a slightly heightened state, right? We probably don't need to go into the full evolutionary, where did that come from, heightened space, that fight or flight. I think more people are aware of that now, but simply regulating that around meals is something that nobody does. Looking at, a simple 3 to 5 deep breaths before a meal and just being able to go, I was actually just kind of still thinking about the last podcast I had, or the meeting I had, or what's on next, that I didn't take a second to actually sit down and digest this meal, right? So most people really associate being full with ultimately really it's bloated and all of this food just stuck in our stomach that's not breaking down, right? If you do that well enough with crappy foods or even good foods in a stressed state, your digestion's not going to be a particularly happy spot.
Right. I'll tell you what, since I went to a more whole food, plant-based diet, I'm so pleased not having that bloated feeling. And even, you may not be familiar with our Thanksgiving here, where people, basically go into a turkey coma here. And, my mom was appalled. She goes like, "What? You're not going to eat my turkey?" I said, "Well, Mom, everybody really enjoys Thanksgiving for the side dishes. I'm just going to eat a whole bunch of side dishes, and I'm not going to be in a coma while watching the football games afterwards." So maybe people enjoy that. I don't know, but I'm not missing it much at all. So a lot of what people with the eating habits and everything, it creates a lot of inflammation, which is an evil word. I mean, obviously there's a point behind inflammation, but Certainly too much of it can lead to things like hypertension and a lot of other maladies. Um, Basically, a lot of what you are espousing, whether it's reducing your stress levels at the dinner table or other lifestyle changes, are really geared to reduce inflammation, correct?
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is just an awareness of one, what inflammation is, right? If you're getting that bloating coming through, you're finding that you're tired after meals, you can't concentrate the same. It is that you're feeling gassy, your joints are hurting, etc. That can be a level of inflammation in the body. The goal here is what is, inflammation itself is actually not negative, right? If we have inflammation around a cut and that's helping to repair tissue through that space, that's beneficial. What we're coming back to is really where we just started this discussion of that acute fix versus that chronic problem, right? So if we're seeing inflammation becoming a chronic issue inside the body, we're constantly bombarding our body with that vegetable oil or those deep fried foods or whatever it might be that keeps coming into our system, we're creating a systemic and chronic problem on top. If we overlap that with some level of stress and not being able to manage our state through our day, and we feel heightened or triggered or anxious throughout the day, and we're adding that on top of a diet that's relatively inflammatory, we're really creating an environment that's not too particularly helpful for overall health, and certainly is a breeding ground for those diseases coming through. All right. So I think, and we could chuck a whole third layer on it from really the thoughts that become levels of stress on top, right? That where that stress really comes from. But inflammation itself is certainly one that we're looking to manage. And I think the main issue that we're trying to lean towards here today is it's not about adding something on top. It's about bringing awareness to what you're already adding to the mess, right?
Yeah,
is it
right.
the negative thoughts? Is it the stress state and an inability to regulate? Is it simply the foods, the drinks, the lack of sleep that are causing to a stressed environment initially? And I think that's really where a lot of people struggle, is they don't have a lot of internal agency, that they're constantly looking for something external to fix themselves, right? And when we bring it back to, ultimately, it should be an empowering process of feeling in control of what your body truly can do, and it can be an amazing space to work with, yet we're not allowing that space, allowing that, at a very basic level, that bacteria in our stomach to have the level of immune function and defense properties in order to really fight off those outside inflammatory markers that are coming through.
Yeah. So how would people recognize those markers? I mean, if I come down with a cold, it's very obvious to me, say, yeah, I've got these symptoms, I've got a cold. How does somebody know, like, oh, I've got all this inflammation going on? Because for a lot of folks, that's just how they feel normally. So maybe
Yep.
they're not even recognizing those quote symptoms.
Totally. And I think that's, a question we ask every single person that's interested in working with us, where's your energy right now? Right. And if it's a 3 out of 10, that's going to tell us that we know what they know what good feels like, because it probably happened the last 6 to 12 months. Whereas we've got a lot of people that are overweight, they feel bloated in their face, they've got sore joints, and I ask them, how's their energy? And they're like, it's an 8 out of 10. That tells me that it's been 24 months, 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years since they've actually understood what good felt like.
Yeah,
Right.
they've adapted to how they're feeling, right?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So that's a very different audience. If it's someone who knows what good feels like and they're frustrated because it was only 6 months ago, versus someone who's really lost that feeling of what good really was like. All right. So the first one, it's going to be a case of really deep diving into a lot of these nutrient deficiencies, that recovery capacity, that ability to really get them back, as you mentioned with the running side of things, to get you to a point where you're functioning at a high degree. With the individual that doesn't know what good feels like, or just knows they've been providing for others, working hard, doing all the stuff, and they've just got to a place like, man, I've got no joy left in my life. I've got no energy left in my life. I'm not in a place where I remember what good truly feels like. That's going to be a spot where we start going back to, okay, well, we need to look at maybe just a simple elimination. Vegetable oils, maybe let's go dairy, gluten. Let's look at something like your refined sugars, and certainly that alcohol, which again, becomes one of the massive blocks of really our emotional intelligence, our emotional awareness overall. Every time I've got someone to do a month without alcohol, yes, they've dropped body fat, but the big thing they always come back to me is, wow, my sleep quality is great.
Yeah.
And I start to feel emotions again, right? Good and bad. And it's a positive overall, because they start to hopefully get to a point where they start to self-regulate. Alcohol is no longer the, oh, I'm feeling an emotion, let's drink, right? Because
Right.
where does that come through? A lot of business owners, a lot of stressed out parents, whatever it might be, things are getting really tough, extra drink comes in, right? So using alcohol as a space of social occasions, enjoying a certain space, finding the balance that works for you, fine. But if it becomes the everyday thing to block out emotions, or the Friday, Saturday, or the Wednesday that really gets hectic, that's a space that we need to learn to bring in that internal agency of self-regulating rather than just finding something externally. And that's just a theme that really has got on top of us. Certainly in America, I see it being a big problem, is we've got the coffee to wake up, we've got the alcohol to calm down, we've got the medication because something hurts. We're not taking the time to pause and internally assess what we can adjust. And it doesn't take more time, it just takes more awareness.
Yeah, and boy, that's a whole different rabbit hole we can go down. There is about, not blocking your feeling. I mean,
Yeah.
there's certainly a lot of challenges in life where people, yes, try to medicate it, and rather than just like, hey, feel it, um, be able to process it and go ahead and learn from it. But that's a whole nother story we can talk about there. Um, that's kind of endemic with what you guys are doing over there. Your body reset program is all about dealing with people who are too busy, and they're basically failing at making the proper adjustments in their life, finding time to do the things that really help them enjoy what they're doing there. How did you get interested in working with people in this particular area?
Yeah, so for us, we're very much working with busy professionals, business owners in their mid 40s and 50s, right? So we're really getting to that point where they're pushing hard in certain endeavors in their life, but it is really getting to a position where the body's no longer along for the ride, right? They're feeling like they're losing focus through that work meeting. They feel like the energy slumped throughout the day or just is non-existent. They've got nothing left when they get home. So it's all pouring into work or that providing space. And when it comes back to a sense of just fulfillment, a sense of health, what this looks like long term, we feel like there's a lack of congruency, I guess, with the work they're putting in, right? So when we look at all the things we've talked about here, it's really a transition or a progression over time of my interest in health overall. It's been my main career through the majority of my life, and being an awareness of very much over the last decade, my transition was from an obsession around exercise, right? I came from a rowing background, from a bodybuilding background, even just an awareness of both on the endurance side and fitness aspect, or more on the physical and the muscular standpoint. There was such an awareness towards that 5%, which is exercise. And it started off with a very military type of coaching, whereas as I worked with a lot more clients in this now demographic, right, business owners, busy professionals, it became a growing awareness of I'm looking at a very small piece of the puzzle. If you're walking through the door with that amount of stress, that amount of inflammation, that lack of self-regulation, I'm working uphill. So that became a transition towards really that gut health space, and where we spent a fair amount of time talking about. And then we really moved into this shift, this awareness of really the shift in how our biology is working, the shift in how our mentality towards exercise and health long term, i.e., from just the physical and potentially that bodybuilding background to that more how can I do things for as long as possible without my body holding me back. All right, that was my transition. So for me, from an age standpoint, the big one is I think most people don't pay attention to the health like truly to this level until they get to their mid 30s. For the first 10 years, they can kind of just get away with, I need to lose a bit of weight, so I'll go for a couple more runs or drop the pizza, whatever it might be. But as we start to get older, there's a bit more going on, right? And people tend to see that they've done a couple diets, it's not working like it used to. And whatever effort they're putting in, whether it be nutritionally, doing more exercise, whatever, there tends to be more resistance to change, and it starts to become more frustrating. There's more questions that are unanswered. And I think that just becomes a beautiful spot to come in from more of a coaching awareness space of, okay, you're really in this for making a long-term sustainable change. And that's really the progression that we've dove into a lot.
Right, right. So where do you direct people at this point? You mentioned, obviously life is impeded in their progress. They're thinking differently about things than they did when they're in their teens and 20s. And
Yeah.
those are the knucklehead kids I deal with a lot of the time. Who,
Yeah.
it's like you try to tell them and they just don't give a damn about it. But that leads you to a lot of the programs you've developed. And how did it come about that you got to develop a lot of these? And how are you implementing a lot of this?
Yeah. For us, it's absolutely an adjusted process over time. I'm in a place now where, initially from an exercise standpoint, that really came from a very personal trainer, exercise professional background, right? As we started to get that awareness of how little I was truly looking at, right? Nutritional, that gut health space, that overall lifestyle design became a very natural transition for us online, because every one of those categories becomes a 10-year journey in its own self, to really bring you to a point where you can feel truly competent in that space.
Yeah.
So for us now, it became certainly from my own personal journey, it became a massive ego check on, I need to bring other people in to really make this what it needs to be. All right. So for our space now, we've got 15 odd coaches with all these different skill sets, whether it's coming from a counseling background, it's coming from a gut health background, it's coming from that exercise background, the sleep background, the breathing background, right? To really look at what our model is today, right? Which really is summarized in what we call the R4 method, all right? Which is really our reset. It's that simplifying initial habits that really allow us to get things moving in the right direction, get our energy in the right spot. And for a lot of people, it's sleep. The second part here is that repair. So as we mentioned before, looking at blood work, really going deeper into those main biomarkers so you can actually get some answers. Something that's becoming an increasing problem that we're seeing across the board, New Zealand, Australia, US, is we're getting doctors looking at our blood work, looking at with an incredibly broad range and saying, yep, you're normal. Doc, I'm not feeling normal, right? So that's where we really start to look at what are those answers below the surface. How do we look at that through more of a lifestyle nutritional adjustment to get you feeling healthy again, right? So R1, R2, reset, repair is very much focused on all the things we've talked about today, which is getting the body healthy first. All right. When we do that, everything starts working better. You're sleeping better, you're breathing better, your energy's better, your focus is better. Now we move into that restore portion, right? Which is very much a quality over quantity space. We're looking at rebuilding that gut microbiome. We're looking at improving strength and muscle contraction to a place where you feel strong, stable, and like you can run through walls. And that gets us to R4, which is reinforce. The whole point we started this process is to make sure we're in a position that we can do this for the rest of our lives. There's no point doing this for 6 weeks and just going back to what we used to do. So reinforce is very much that embedding of, is this enjoyable? Is this sustainable? Is this personalized for you? All right. And that's really what that sequence, again, that's a whole hour in itself to break that down, but that summary of the R4, the awareness of how we approach it, I think you could summarize it as, spend that time sharpening the axe before you start swinging. Get things healthy first. And then when you're in that space, that discussion of bringing the exercise in, making those tweaks and adjustments for nutrition, whether it be more timing, more macronutrients, whatever it might be, allows you to see your body actually respond like it did 20 years ago. And I think that's a big frustration with that over 40 crowd that we see, is they make the change and they see zero results. We need to get the body healthy first. And that's where we start.
Yeah. It's interesting. You talk, Olly, about some points that were, I was just listening to a podcast this morning, as a matter of fact, of a doctor, a physical therapist who's right here in Colorado. And he made the point about how you get to a certain age and you stop getting those annual physicals. Like when you're playing sports in high school and college, you have to get an annual sports physical. And again, it's not really in depth, but you are at least getting those. But as people get older, they stop seeing the doctor every year the way they used to. And typically, when you do go see the doctor, at least here in the States, you go and get a blood panel done, and it is very broad. And the doctor takes a look at it and says, okay, yeah, everything looks great. The fact of the matter is, you can actually request pretty much any blood test you want. And well, two things. One is that, like, you have to know what to request, but also you have to have a doctor who can even look at it and interpret it for you. In a lot of cases, that your general practitioner doctor here, I don't know if you have those in New Zealand, your general family physician, but they're very broadly trained, and they kind of look at it and say, you're good. And they're not digging deep enough into exactly what may ail you. And you're not digging deep enough into, like, okay, sure, you look healthy, but maybe you're not feeling great, or maybe you're 20, 30 pounds overweight. What are the reasons for this? So it's interesting. You dive into it a whole lot deeper, don't you?
Yeah, it's I've got so many thoughts on this, but it's very much, the doctors and GPs in general, we're looking at it through a lens of what they're trained to do, right? They're there to make sure you don't have a life-threatening disease in order to prescribe or adjust from a medical standpoint what they can do. Now, medical is very much going to be drug-based initially. There's studies from a nutritional standpoint are incredibly low, and they really, spend an afternoon discovering what calories are, and that's really as far as it goes. So when we see how many books are coming out now with doctors or just general GPs recommending certain diets, I see that as laughable. I see it as a step in the right direction, because they're starting to hopefully start to address how much nutrition is impacting the cellular health of the overall body, and hopefully they're connecting the dots with disease in the long run. But truly what we're looking at here is we're not seeing a problem of getting the blood work done. We're getting a problem from reading the blood work and interpreting that into an actionable plan that you can utilize today. I had that call with a lady just yesterday who has had the doctor's appointment. They've had the specialist appointment. They've been bounced around between 5 different specialists to find what's wrong. They've all said they're absolutely fine, and she doesn't feel good at all, right?
Right.
I come in with a lens of like, look, I'm going to look at part of this through a nutritional lens, but that's not enough. I'm going to look at this through an exercise lens, and I'm going to look at it through knowing you over the last 30 minutes to find out from a lifestyle standpoint what's coming in here as well, right? Because some of those questions were an easy nutritional fix. You need a little bit more of this. There's maybe there's a deficiency in zinc, and that's leading to this, this, and this. And really, it's not an iron problem; it's an absorption problem. That's step number one.
Right.
We start looking at, and certainly in that space, someone's prescribed iron and something that's just given and given and given, and they don't have the capacity to absorb it in the first instance, right? Big problem. The second part was nutritionally, she was actually eating relatively well, but a couple of her lipid markers and a couple of things were a little bit out of range. I said, look, this isn't nutritional. This is that you're not actually sweating, contracting, moving to the degree that allows your body to self-regulate some of these components, and in a lot of ways start to assimilate nutrients slightly better. Right. So through all of these specialists, all of these tests that were done, the answers were there. It's just a case of what context is coming through. And we certainly now live in a world where, if you're talking to someone that has a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And really looking at awareness of what other components and strategies do we need to require, and really it becomes your own personal ownership of your health, I think is a space we're starting to get to, right? We're starting to see a lot more use of personal blood work, personal readings, these bioage trackers, etc. And I think that's a positive step in the right direction of just taking back your ownership of your health, understanding what's in the way, and more importantly, what you can do about it through your actions, not through the drug that's prescribed to you through a diagnosis.
Yeah. So you guys have a big pharma in New Zealand, just like the way we have big pharma here, that is basically all about fixing a problem without looking at preventative measures, because there's no money in that. And that's a whole discussion we could have there too. So, but no, those are really good points you make there. Basically, I go see my doctor, and I get my annual physical, but I'm in his office 30, 40 minutes. And that's it. I mean, he's a good guy. I really trust him, but that's all I get. Whereas you're able to offer a program where you're not acting as a doctor. You're looking at the lifestyle here and giving people actionable steps they can take to take control of their health. So if somebody were to get involved with Body Reset, what does that actually look like? I mean, how do they interact with you, and what steps do they take to stay on track? Because as we kind of touched on lightly, a lot of people fail in continuing the program. So what do you guys provide for people that helps them stay on track and getting to those goals?
Yeah, it's very dependent on the time and the goal and all of the things that we want to take in context with them individually. But the initial sequence for us is very much that analysis of where are you right now. A good coaching relationship is always you're learning from us, but we're learning from you just as much, right? So here's some things that we know work with this type of individual to really fast track where you're at right now, get you healthy, get your energy up, and get you to a space where things are feeling good. But over time, this is an iterative process, right? So for us, we really, really have found the best version of this is more of a hybrid model where we see they're working with their own personal coach throughout that process. They're keeping them accountable. They're having those calls. They're really staying on track and having that space to have that connection, have that understanding of where you're actually at in life, right? Because if you're eating the same thing as the person next to you, but there's a massive difference in your life circumstance, your relationships, your work, etc., that's going to have a pretty big difference in your stickability of a plan, right? So from a coaching standpoint, that's there. On top, we stack on a level of specialists. So if that's on the exercise front, if that's that deeper blood work through our clinical nutritionist, that becomes an awareness of how can we build on top of the plan that you've built alongside your coach. And then there's a really important element that a lot of people mix is the group aspect of identity shifts, right? If you're trying to get a goal because it sounds nice and you kind of like the idea of getting there, you're going to struggle and struggle and struggle, and then you're going to quit. If you shift that identity to really ultimately burning the old identity of yourself to create the new one, that awareness of this is not something I need to do, it's something I want to do. Massive difference, right?
Sure.
Most people are like, my doctor told me I need to change. Well, that's a really hard client to work with. Look, I'm in a place where I've finally drawn a line in the sand. I want to change. I want to feel energetic. I want to feel athletic again. Now that's a place where I think that identity really becomes a big part of that ability to look inward, be more aware of the process, be more enjoyable of the whole process, right? The reason so many people, certainly recently I've seen, really don't like exercise or don't like workouts is because all they're doing is going 1, 2, 3 with a dumbbell, right? They don't tune into anything. Whereas if you want to feel strong, you want to be a gym person, whatever that identity is that you need to break for yourself, you start to walk into a gym and you're assessing how your body feels. Did I sleep well? Is my energy in a good spot? Is my shoulder in the right place? There's so much to think about that it becomes more of an intuitive, nearly meditative type process. Running can be the same way, right? You just get into that cadence, you get into that pace where you feel you're in tune with how your body should be in that space. So where did I start? That awareness of really those 3 levels. You've got your individual support. You've got that specialist space where you're able to really get those deep answers to work out how your body's working. And then third, you've got that space with like-minded individuals along with a ride with you, navigating life, shifting that identity to someone you truly want to be with, new friend groups, new ideas of what holidays look like and how to make sure it sticks long-term. So that's really our 3 layers of how we approach it. And I think that allows us to fast track a lot of the house shifts that people are after that they haven't been quite able to grasp.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I always say, people need to have a purpose, or as they like to say today, you have to have your why to all that. I mean, obviously, when I go out to run every single day, I've got many purposes, but that's what gets me excited. I'm excited to go out and run because it's like I want to be outdoors. I want to, feel the blood moving in my system. I want to be working towards that goal of the next race that I'm training for. But that's the kind of thing that you made it almost sound like, well, somebody kind of hits rock bottom in a way, almost like an alcoholic does. You say, okay, that's it. I got to change my life. Is there a point where people don't have to hit rock bottom, so to speak, where they just say, hey, life is good, but I would like to be even better than I'm at?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Rock bottom looks different for each person, right? At the end of the day, it's a personal standard. And I think the question that we start asking a lot of people that people need to ask themselves is, how bad would you like it to get before you change? And it becomes a really interesting self-reflective question because a lot of people, certainly Kiwis, are very known for just saying, it's not too bad. It's all right. It feels a bit shitty, but it'll be fine. And I think it's one of those things where we're very good at pushing it down the road, right? It's the dog that's moaning while lying on the nail. It's painful, but it's not quite bad enough to finally get up and move somewhere else. And I think a lot of people are in that space where they're moaning about it, but they're not actually willing to change. And I think when you get to that self-inflection point, maybe it's the photo where you're like, oh, wow, that looks a lot worse than it should have. Or maybe it's the doctor's appointment where it didn't go quite as well as you thought, or that back injury that's reoccurring. I think the individual personal standard of how bad are you willing for it to get before you draw the line and say, no more. For some people, that's going to be true rock bottom, right? You've been kicked out of your house, you're addicted to drugs, all of those things. Or it could simply be a case of, oops, the belt no longer fits. That's not happening anymore, right? Like it's very much down to your personal standard of how low do you want it to get? How painful does it need to be in order for you to shift, in order for you to be motivated to make that change? And I think that's a space that, it's a really, really good point. It's your personal standard and nothing changes if nothing changes, right? So at some point, it's just a personal standard of, okay, no, this has got bad enough. I'm willing to make that shift, and there's some necessary adjustments that are going to feel uncomfortable, but it's not as uncomfortable staying where I am. And I think it's just that personal ratio that you need to find for yourself.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I don't know if you know American sports teams at all, but if you're a Boston Red Sox fan, you are definitely thinking all the time, I'm a lousy, miserable pond scum of an individual, and yet I root for this team anyway. So how low does it have to go before your eyes wake up?
Before you change.
You shouldn't be a horrible Red Sox fan, but
Got it.
Yeah. Hey, are we up against it time wise here for you here?
We are. I can move. We can move at some point, but yeah, we will need to finish up.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. No, I appreciate this time. This has been really fun and appreciate your time so much. Let me ask you though, where can people find you? Your website, by the way, is great. I found so many great articles to read and other
Brilliant.
resources you have. Why don't you tell people where they can find you out there, and if they want to have a relationship with you guys, please let them know how to do that too.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you found the website. We put a lot of stuff out for free. My awareness of different learning styles is something that is a whole different topic around how I learn. But whether it's video, whether it's listening, whether it's written, we've got a lot on that website. From everything we've talked today, I think consolidating it, if you want to take action steps, whether it's with us or just you like this as being interesting, definitely going to our website, which is bodyreset.online. That'll be the best place to go. Scroll down on the first page and you'll see the 5-day challenge, both male and female. That's a 5-day sequence and series that allows us to really solidify everything we've gone through today in 5 days of simple, easy steps to action for yourself in your life in a very simple, actionable way. And I think that's the easiest place to start. It's just an awareness of all the stuff we've gone through today. It's not about adding more information. It's about applying that to your body, putting it into your day, and seeing and benefiting from those rewards. So bodyreset.online, check out the 5-day challenge, go through that, install that into your own life. And if you feel amazing and you want to have further help from us, then you can book a call, talk to our team, and we can really start to go deeper into what more of a personal plan might look like for you.
Yeah, no, very cool. You broke up for a second, but then you recapitulated it there very well. So yeah, that 5-day or 5-step challenge sounds really cool. And then you've got, I know you had links on there to Instagram, YouTube, and all those kind of things. People can find it right there. So that's
Yeah, we
cool.
put tons out.
Yeah, no, you have tons out, which I really appreciate that. That's awesome. So hopefully some people will want to take advantage of that. What have we missed here, Olly? This has been great.
Bill, we've missed everything. There's so much to talk about. Not everything, but we've missed so much. There's, every topic we could have talked about for hours, but I think we really were able to encapsulate the awareness of self, the ability to self-govern our own health, and the ability to tune into the information, the adjustments that we really have control over. So if you do feel out of control of your own health, you do feel like you're not getting the answers, it is out there. It's just maybe not through the traditional system that you're used to. And if you are on this podcast, you're already part of that 1% that's leaning towards making the changes for self. So you're in the right direction. It's just taking that next step.
Yeah, no, I totally concur with you there. I mean, again, that's a little bit of what I did there when like I say, took a simple step of getting this blood test and worked with a nutritionist, and bam, so many great changes that I felt. So, it is under your own control for sure. So, hey, Olly, I know you got to run, but hey, I appreciate this so much. Enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon there while I get over to dinner time over here.
Yep.
And it's been a pleasure. We'll probably need to hook up again here because, as you said, there are a lot of topics we can cover. There's an awful lot you cover on your website that I know I'd love to chat about more too. So,
No, thank you, Bill. I really appreciate your time. I think they're really insightful questions. And for all the tangents we went down, I hope people got value out of this.
you bet. Absolutely. Well, hey, have a great day, my friend. And looking forward to talking to you somewhere else down the road.
Likewise, have an amazing week.
Yeah, thank you.
See ya. Bye.
Okay, I'm just going to bam.